Welcome to u-nite Unity Temple's weekly interspiritual service. Welcome here no matter what your race, religion, no matter what your gender identification or sexual orientation, you are welcome here in this place. Now, every Sunday I come on and I share a teaching from a unity perspective, but it's important for me to let you know at the outset that nothing that is said up here is gospel. Everything that's shared is shared from a perspective, and the invitation to each of you is to enter into this interspiritual space where you can grapple with your own living questions about what you believe, and that you have a comfortable space in which to question, to doubt, to disbelieve me, and to find your own truth, hopefully, in the midst of that grappling. So, welcome each and every one of you. Now, this is a unique service in that we're not doing like the typical sermon that people do on Sundays. We're in the midst of an Enneagram lesson series. And the Enneagram is this ancient tool of sacred psychology. I'm very much a believer in the importance of what I call a psycho-spiritual approach to waking up and growing up. That we don't just have this sort of woo-woo out there spirituality, but that's something very much grounded in psychology and growth and understanding. So I'm deeply passionate about the Enneagram, and we today will be entering into week 4, where we'll be focused on the point 4 on the Enneagram, and I'll elaborate on that in a bit. Just want to say very briefly, to review, in week 1, what we explored, is this idea that the Enneagram is represented by a circle with 9 points around it. The circle represents totality. It represents your own wholeness. And each point on the Enneagram, when we look at the Enneagram of holy ideas, can be seen as representing sort of a face of that wholeness. And if you are a particular point along that circle, it's as if you have, in particular, lost sight of that particular face of being or reality or wholeness. Having lost sight of that, each of us develops kind of our own egoic personality, if you will, a personality structure designed to compensate for that which you thought you lost. And so here, our goal is to wake up and grow up by recognizing how each of us has gotten lost, has lost sight of awareness. And through recognizing how our particular type has lost sight of awareness, finding our way home from that, home to a sense of awakening, to that knowing of wholeness, and to that knowing of our oneness with all that is. So that's the approach that we have. And in week 1, we focus on the holy idea of holy perfection, which type 1, which is my type, has lost sight of. And so we can remember that in week 1, there's this personality type that's designed to look for what's wrong in a room. Why? Because if I lost sight of holy perfection, then I believe it's my job to perfect the world, to correct it, to fix it. And then at point 2, in week 2, we explored the holy idea as kind of a blend of holy will and holy freedom. Now, if you're a type 2 and you lost sight of this face of God that says, you know what, that what I want, that what I will is part of the one will. And so it's not a bunch of competing wants and wills in the world. When I have lost sight of that, I developed this strategy for saying, I'm going to figure out how to get my needs met in the world. So I'm hyper-focused on needs. But I have this sort of backward strategy as a type 2, which is if I focus on meeting your needs, perhaps then you will in turn meet mine, the strategy of the two. And then last week with type 3, we focused on the threefold holy idea of type 3, which is holy law, holy harmony, and holy hope. Now, when you know all those things, you know that there is just this law, this truth that unfolds for the good of all. But when you don't know that, when you in particular have lost sight of that fundamental truth, well, you become a separate doer in the world, right? This doingness that has to offset, well, the universe isn't just going to unfold. I have got to do it. And then I become the best doer ever. And so my whole identity becomes over-focused on my accomplishments, my doing. And so all of that selfhood gets trapped in a cycle of striving in each of these types, that when we learn our types, we're able to sink back into the knowing of the holy idea, the face of unity, or God, if you will, that we've lost sight of. Why? So we can rest in that. So we can find peace in our lives. So we can experience the virtues that are present in each type, like the virtue of humility, the virtue of veracity, the virtue of serenity. So by recognizing our egoic filter, we start to operate and move back behind the mask into the knowing of our truth. So with that, we'll launch into type 4 today. And keep in mind that even if you're not that personality type, that the Enneagram paints a picture of consciousness in general. So all of these themes are universal to us. But that particular type, that point, just took that point, that issue, a little more personally than the rest of us. And so that's the distinction. All right. So in that epic poem, Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus at one point goes to the goddess Circe, I think that's how you pronounce it, and asks her for help in his journey home, to help him find his way home. And she did what any good goddess would do. She sent him to Hades. So she sends him to hell, to Hades, to look for the blind prophet Tiresias. And she says, yeah, you're going to have to do all sorts of blood rituals and all that before this prophet will tell you or help you. But he will direct you and give you guidance for your next stage home. So he obeys. And he does this fantastic journey down into the depths of Hades. And there he does find this blind prophet. And he speaks to the prophet, and the prophet does tell him, lays out his future, tells him the probabilities of certain things happening. And the good news, he says, is that you will likely find your way home. He said. But, he added, not without tremendous suffering. Not without tremendous suffering. And during your journey back, you will need to also learn to contain your desire, she tells him. But while he's down in Hades, Odysseus also encounters all the other souls, all these other dead souls, if you will. And they don't have the same optimistic message. To the contrary, for the most part, the message of these spirits in the land of the dead is twofold. One of the messages is that of wistful could-have-beens. These folks who have passed away are lamenting, spending their time in Hades, lamenting their poor choices in their lives. So they're dwelling on the choices that they have made. So that's one piece. And the other piece is that, for the most part, the message is a message of longing and envy for the people who are still alive. And so, as Odysseus down there in Hades, he encounters all of this, confronts it, and now needs to decide what to do. The good news is that he listens to the prophet and has some optimism and encouragement and decides he's not going to stay here with those who dwell upon what could have been in the past and who spend their time envying others, but instead he will move forward and outward. And he knows, though, because he's seen it laid out via this prophet, that the rest of the journey is going to involve suffering. It will be arduous, but he's still committed to making this journey home. And so the next thing that he knows he has to face is that island with the sirens that we've heard about. The sirens, the 3 sirens that sing their song. And so in anticipation of this, knowing that he will need to encounter this, he has some choices that he can make. Because, I don't know what they used in the old days in ancient Greece, but something akin to earplugs. So he got earplugs, for all of his men on his boat. So he gives them all earplugs and says, we want to make sure you stay on course. So we're going to give you these earplugs, and you can stay so you won't be beckoned by the call of these sirens. But then for him, he could have done the same. But instead, Odysseus says, you know what? I'm consciously choosing to hear the call of the sirens. But I want you guys all to tie me up in the boat, with this thick rope, and to make sure that I don't go after them. And I want you, no matter how much I scream and demand and beg and flail my arms, to not untie me. And so his men do exactly as instructed. And so he stays tied there to the mast. And as he does, he makes it through the whole journey. And he moves forward on his way home. Despite the fact that these sirens, they're not just calling out any kind of message. It's a very personalized message. They're telling him about his past sufferings. Remember the Trojan War, they sing to him. Remember how you struggled and you suffered, they said to him. They sang. And they continued to sing, and their song went along the lines of, if you listen to this song over and over again, if you keep listening, if you listen in close, you will gain the wisdom of this past suffering of yours. And so they tempted him in with great wisdom, were he just to stay here with them, in this past and in this longing. But despite even that, despite the call of the sirens to the past, what he did was stay grounded and move forward and through successfully. Beatrice Chestnut, one of the premier modern teachers of the Enneagram, lays out this story in her book, The Complete Enneagram. And she offers us this beautiful insight around what many of us know to be the passion and the egoic fixation of the type 4. The ego fixation of the type 4 is melancholy, longing, this wistful sadness, and mostly for the past. And the passion of the type 4 is envy, the looking out, the what others have that I do not, this sense of missing something. And she tells us, Beatrice Chestnut does in her book, that the beauty of the story is that it paints for us not only the deep pain of the type 4 on the Enneagram, a pain that maybe we all have touched upon and share. Not only the deep pain, but also the profound wisdom of this journey. And I'll get to that a little bit more in a second, because there is something, if we look at the story of Odysseus, we realize that he made a conscious choice not to bypass, not to cover his ears, and therefore not even address his longing, not even address the could-have-beens and the concerns about the past, but actually to hear them, to be with them, but even while he was tethered. And so I'll talk a little bit about how I see that tethering that we do that sustains us through our passage through the dark times when the emotions of longing and of could-have-beens and of the past and of envy of others can drag us down in a way that some of us may even fear going there a little bit, because we don't feel tethered to something true that will enable us to take that journey and not be swept away by the siren call. And so we move into this notion now of the holy ideas I discussed earlier, that is sort of the central, like the holy ideas represent the facets of God. If you don't like the word God, the facets of unity, the facets of being, the faces of objective reality. And each of the holy ideas represents just one face of that diamond, if you will. Now, going into this is a way that will set it up to show how it is that the construct of the four and things that are four-like happen. So I'm going to take a step back from this metaphor or analogy for a bit to go into the notion of what the holy idea, which is holy origin of the type 4, is fundamentally about. So many of you have heard that here in unity, from a unity perspective, life, all of life, all of you, all of us, everything that is consciousness. That we may kind of operate as if this is a chair, and that's you, and this is me, and that's the floor. But that fundamentally and essentially, life is pure consciousness. And so sometimes in unity, we will actually refer to God as divine mind. All that is being like this universal, active intelligence. Now, A Course in Miracles offers a very nice teaching that can supplement this understanding well. It says that you, that I, that you are an idea in the mind of God. If everything is consciousness, it makes sense then that we are nothing more than ideas ourselves, ideas in this universal consciousness. So A Course in Miracles goes on and says, you are an idea in the mind of God, and ideas leave not their source. Think on that for a second. If I give birth to an idea, where does it go? It doesn't go anywhere, right? It abides in consciousness. It stays in consciousness. It might get expressed in consciousness, but it doesn't leave consciousness. Ideas leave not its source. So when we consider reality at that level, when we consider ourselves at that level of reality, then we start to come into this understanding of what holy origin means, which is that you have never left your source. That not only have you never left, but that you cannot leave your source. That you are so integral even more than integral. Even that language suggests two-ness, right? But that you are that. One mind, divine mind, consciousness, expressing as you in this special and unique way that it can only do at the point of where you are in consciousness. Normally, when we think of being children, there's this idea in the Bible that you are children of the Most High, right? Children of God. We think, my physical mom, I'm plopped out of my mother, and I'm over here, and she's over there, is what we experience as human beings, right? And so this notion that actually being a child of God is not like that. Being a child of God is being like an idea expressed in the mind of God. Somehow, when we know this, the panic and the fear of being apart from anything that is begins to dissipate. When we know this, that we live and move and have our being infinitely in this divine mind, this presence, then we operate differently. But when we don't know this, and I would say all of us, for the most part, don't know this deeply. But when we don't know this and then we take it personally, we become the type 4 on the Enneagram. The type 4 has lost sight fundamentally of this basic idea that I am one with Source, that I have never separated from it, that I'm not over here. I didn't get plopped out of Source, now fending for myself back over here. But having not remembered this fundamental truth, the type 4 operates, and we all to some degree operate from the sense of separateness, this profound sense of separateness in the world. We can understand when we learn that the type 4 is all about being special and unique. You know how to identify someone who's a personality type 4, because usually they will dress a little bit more uniquely than everyone else in the room. But if they don't dress that way, they might associate their belief systems with sort of with ones that are less in conformity with modern culture. So they can identify with belief systems that make them more unusual. A 4, I used to be an attorney, a 4 who's in a workplace where everyone's dressed the same will likely be the one with the special red bow tie, that stands out, right? There's a way to stand out for the type 4. And some of us, from far away, when we look at folks who are like, oh gosh, they're just wanting special attention. It's so obvious that they're calling for special attention to themselves in this way, right? That when we understand the depth of what drives that compulsion to need to be unique and special, there's such a deep compassion that can flow from us to know that, wow, the more special this person feels the need to be, the more special we feel the need to be, the more it's a sign that we have lost sight of our oneness with our very origin, our very source. I'm going to quote, you already have it up here. So, quote from, let me share about Robert Brummett first. So Robert Brummett was just here this morning leading the Temple Buddha Center. Some of you might already know him, and he's taught a lot of u-nite services, led a lot of u-nite services here. He wrote a book called Living Originally. And in his book, he says, usually when people talk about living originally, you think living uniquely, right? We think that that's, they have a lifestyle that is kind of special and unique. And he says that's how we normally equate like that notion and that term. But in his book, he offers an alternative definition. And in that, he quotes Cynthia Bourgeault here in saying, in the actual meaning of the word, however, being original doesn't mean trying to be different. It means being connected to the origin. You can't be original by trying to be original. You become original by staying true to what your heart sees. You can't be original by trying to be original. You become original by staying true to what your heart sees. And Robert adds in his book, to live originally is to live consciously from the ever-present origin of life. It is to live from the very source of what is. To live intimately connected to that source. Now, even as we learn that, this idea that when we are connected, when we recognize that we are already connected to Source, then we inevitably just find a ground of being inside ourselves which understands that we are but a spontaneous expression of that Source, valuable, not needing to have independent value back here. It's only when I think I've plopped myself out here, I'm like, shoot, right? What am I going to do? Well, I better be special and unique to attract attention over here because all the good is over there. But when we fall back and rest back in that like deep awareness of Source, then originality, creative expression that is authentic and grounded in this wholeness emerges naturally. I will move my hands in a way that only I can move my hands and speak in the way that only this point of consciousness can express itself. I am not needing to make extra egoic efforts to be special or unique when I am grounded in my origin, if you will. And so that's important to know. But for each of these types on the Enneagram, there is such a powerful sense of loss of their particular idea that what happens is it's not just the loss. It's that somehow now who I am is this. So who I am gets steeped in needing to be special. Again, especially true for those who are personality type 4s, but I know certainly true for me. I know when I was younger, you scan your parents for love and approval, and you watch. I'm watching to see what gets their special attention and their special love. Oh, getting good grades. So I'm going to get good grades. I'm going to be extra smart and competent in order to believe in my worth and lovability. In romantic relationships, I didn't know it until I was, in 5th grade, and I got a crush love note from a fellow classmate. And boy, did that excite me. And I was like, I'm special. I'm special because what he said in this note meant that, I was particularly charming or particularly cute, and therefore I had value. And so that just fed stuff around, I could feel even better about who I am. I don't know about this inner work stuff, but this outer stuff of wanting people to tell me the ways in which I was better than. I wanted to be a good person, but I don't really just want to be a good person. I want to be a better than you good person. Why? Why? Really? Why do we do this? Is it really just like we're bad people or we can look to if we don't know our source, then this image and identity that if I'm on my own, I better be special, because how else will I get support? How else will I get my needs met? How else will I feel okay about myself? But for creating around each of us little twinkling lights. I was triggered when Summer was singing earlier in that. I was like, did she really just wink at me? No, no, she has a stage presence. I'm just kidding. She has a stage presence, right? Like any good performer. No, where she's looking out and she's smiling. But I was like, dang, that was good. I felt like one time she looked. It seemed like we had eye contact. Summer, we did. We had eye contact. I felt special. No, there was a moment, and I was like, how many of us are drawn toward the people who help us to feel special? Out of all the people in the room, I'm looking at you, right? And so all of us have this need to some degree in some way, and we create our specialness in different ways. A few weeks ago, we talked about type 2s. They create their specialness through being a kind and giving person. You're not just giving, especially giving, right? And the 3s, not just competent, especially competent. And that's where I get my value. 2, 3, and 4 happen to be the image type on the Enneagram. So that center, that triad in particular, gets wrapped up in not me, not the truth of me, because that's kind of unbearable, because I feel like I've somehow plopped out of God somehow and left. So that's unbearable. So I'll focus on my image. And so 2, 3s, and 4s do that in different ways. 3s have this positive image. I'm competent. Yeah, good. But 4s have sort of the reverse. There's a self-image of being less than, of suffering and longing. And so there's this weirdness of I will attract you through my especially difficult life, because this being especially wounded, it makes me special in a way. And so there's an attachment to that. And so the concern of the 4 in letting go of that is the concern that all egoic structures face, which is the fear of death. Meaning, if this is who I am, then to lose the specialness with which my ego's identified is to die. But every wisdom tradition says we must die before we die in order to wake up into our true nature. And so the invitation is for this type and for all of us to look at the passion and qualities of the 4, which are melancholy and longing, and to look at our particular relationship to those things. If you take a moment and check in. So first, check in with longing. And is there something past that we cling to? A relationship with a parent that we wish had happened but never did, A partnership. Things that we look back and thought, if I had done this instead of that, then I wouldn't be in the predicament I am in today. If we consider the teaching of the journey through Hades and the journey with the sirens, it's important to remember that this is not something to overlook. This is not something to bypass, but that perhaps the wisdom of Odysseus is that for us to find our way home, each and every one of us must consider the sirens, must listen, and not just stay too busy, not keep moving forward, but listen to the call of the longing that is in all of us, and to be with those feelings. And so if you are a 4, if you tend towards that already, it's so important. It's important for all of us to, even as we go there, to stay tied to truth, so that we can actually go into the feelings without getting lost in them, without staying down in Hades, without getting trapped by the siren call, but still to endure and enter into the journey, and not let fear of negativity pulling us down to keep us from going home, because we must traverse that territory. 4s are experts at traversing that territory. They were also, unfortunately, experts at pitching a tent and staying there a while. So 4s can guide some of us, the types that are a little more optimistic and positive, in entering into, being willing to journey in there. But we could be the friends also that tie each other to truth by reminding ourselves of the truth that we are one with holy origin, that we are but an idea in the mind of spirit, that we have never left our source. And being connected deeply to that source, we each can live what I hope and I think each one of us wants to live, which is an authentic life. Living originally, to live from each of our own origins in a way that feeds our own souls and feeds the world through the expression of our unique gifts. This can never happen when we are but showing this image to the world and upholding an image of ourselves. It has to happen back here as we steep ourselves in holy origin. And as we move in through this passage of confronting envy and longing, we arrive at the virtue of the 4, which is equanimity. And there's a quote up there that defines equanimity. So if envy is a state of emotional reactivity based on a perception that others have something you need or lack, equanimity is a place of openness and acceptance based on a larger view of the whole of ourselves. So there's such an importance then, again, of moving through actual feelings. Envy and longing is the portal, is the opening, is that which in our journey home we must traverse through. But we need to be tethered to truth, to find a ground of being in a wholeness that is not just our personality type, but something we can only know back of that. In times of meditation and prayer, we touch into that. And the more we practice prayer and meditation in that grounding way, the more we steep ourselves in the truth of the knowing of our fundamental, not defectiveness as the 4 will think, but the fundamental truth of our goodness and our wholeness. And allow what naturally arises from that to be the unique and special gift that we offer to the world. So for each one of us, the lesson of the type 4, how do we do this? We do this with presence. The 4 will want to long to the past. And so we bring ourselves to the present moment, and we allow the feeling of longing to be there, and we presence it with objective, inner observer kind of awareness from this compassionate self that sees but is not lost in that emotion of what is. And we bring ourselves then to a state of equanimity, which is about balance and wholeness. So I encourage each of you this week to consider if you are a type that tends to linger in feelings of longing, and if you are a 4 or have a 4 wing, then you might be a little bit more focused this week on the tethering process. But if you are like a type 7 or one of the more positive types that tends to not even want to go into difficult emotions, maybe 2s can be like that too, positive outlook types, then perhaps the journey for you this week is, of course, like the 4, to tether, but to actually dip and dive in, to face the oceans, the sea, and move out there into what could feel like a vast tumult of feeling that could sweep you away, right? Into the seduction, like the siren seduction of the emotions. So many of us will not go to our negative feelings because we fear, if I go there, I might not get out, right? So tether, use spiritual community, just like Odysseus used the folks on his boat to support and hold the truth of your wholeness, the truth of your goodness, the truth of your goodness, not because you're special, but because you are one with all that is, fundamentally. And so it is. And so you are.